The '06 World Cup had no option but to be iconic. Almost every major nation had star-studded squads featuring legends from the 90s and early 2000s, alongside emerging wonderkids who would define football in the 21st century. Predicting a winner between the usual candidates before a ball was kicked was almost impossible, and hardly any of the favorites flopped, meaning that the latter stages were filled with epic head-to-head clashes between the world's best. But it wasn't just the quality of football that made '06 special. Hosted in Germany, a nation of footballing royalty, the atmosphere, identity, and spectacle were unmatched. Not to mention the tournament would end with one of the most shocking moments in football history. This is the entire story of the '06 World Cup. There's arguably no greater country on earth to host a World Cup tournament than Germany. The Central European nation is home to large, atmospheric stadiums like the Allianz Arena, Signal Iduna Park, and Olympiastadion, and supporters from all over the planet flock to Germany in their thousands for the month-long celebration of football. Brazil entered the tournament as the holders, having danced their way to glory in '02 with R9, Ronaldinho, and Roberto Carlos reminding the world why we love the beautiful game. The trio would return for the '06 World Cup as the Samba Kings looked to retain their title, but this time they'd have strong competition. France had a sublime squad that featured Thierry Henry, Patrick Vieira, and Zinedine Zidane, who had announced that he'd retire at the end of the tournament. Zizou had already lifted the World Cup, Champions League, and several league titles, so his final tournament was as much about showing the world his sublime balance, control, and skill for one last time as it was about hunting for another trophy. England arrived in Germany with their greatest team in decades, as Rio Ferdinand partnered with John Terry in defense, Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard combined in midfield, Wayne Rooney and Michael Owen led the line. There was a feeling of optimism bordering on arrogance about England's chances that summer. But while the English believed that they had the best team on the planet, there were other teams who could make similar claims. Spain had Xavi, Andres Iniesta, and Fernando Torres, among others, while the Dutch had a scary attack featuring Arjen Robben, Ruud van Nistelrooy, and Robin van Persie. Meanwhile, Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi traveled to their first World Cup finals with Portugal and Argentina as fresh-faced youngsters ready to change the future of football forever. The tournament of a generation got underway as hosts Germany faced Costa Rica. It took fewer than 7 minutes for the celebrations to begin as Philipp Lahm cut in from the left-hand side to score a terrific opening goal. Germany continued in similar vein, winning the opener 4-2 before beating Poland 1-0 with a last-minute winner, and Ecuador 3-0 thanks to goals from their likable strike duo of Lucas Podolski and Miroslav Klose. Ecuador won their 2 additional games and joined Germany in the knockout stages. In Group B, England won their opening 2 games against Paraguay and Trinidad and Tobago before drawing with Sweden, a game in which Joe Cole scored a sublime goal of the tournament contender. The draw ensured that both teams qualified for the last 16 on 7 and 5 points respectively. Lionel Messi scored his first World Cup goal as Argentina beat Serbia and Montenegro 6-0 on their way to topping Group C. The only game the Argentines failed to win was a 0-0 draw against the Netherlands, who also picked up 7 points to progress in second place. It was as if the rivalry between Ronaldo and Messi was born at the '06 World Cup, because the day after Leo netted his first goal, CR7 grabbed his first during a 2-0 win over Iran. Portugal won each of their 3 Group D matches and qualified for the last 16 alongside Mexico. Italy were quietly confident about their chances at the World Cup and enjoyed a steady Group E, picking up 7 points against Ghana, the US, and the Czech Republic. Ghana's victories against the US and the Czechs ensured that they qualified alongside Italy. Brazil were scintillating in Group F, scoring 7 goals and picking up 9 points. The highlight of Brazil's group stage performance was a 4-1 victory over Japan, in which R9 scored a brace to become the tournament's all-time joint top goal scorer. Meanwhile, Australia made history by finishing second in the group and qualifying for the knockout stages for the first time, securing 4 points from their games against Japan and Croatia. France were disappointing in Group G, failing to win either of their opening 2 games against Switzerland and South Korea. They were on the brink of a shock early elimination before second-half goals from Vieira and Henry secured a 2-0 win against Togo to finish in second place, while Switzerland topped the group. Fernando Torres scored 3 times and David Villa scored twice as Spain topped Group H while winning each of their games. Their young team was largely unproven on the world stage, but they looked unflustered and played arguably the most expansive football of any team at the tournament. Ukraine were runners-up after enjoying victories against Saudi Arabia and Tunisia. Great knockout stages often include drama, controversy, and upsets, but the '06 group stages were arguably even greater than any previous tournament as each of the favorites progressed to the last 16 while playing attacking football. It was immediately clear that this year's World Cup would not be written by one of the tournament's underdogs, but one of the elite nations battling for glory, and many of them would come up against each other in the knockout rounds. But the last 16 started with a game between Germany and Sweden, which only ever seemed to have one winner. Podolski bagged a brace inside the opening 12 minutes to put the game to bed and send the hosts to the last 8. Many supporters had similar thoughts about Argentina's clash with Mexico, who had been eliminated at the round of 16 in each of the previous 3 tournaments. But for a moment, Mexico thought its luck had changed as Rafael Marquez established an early advantage. However, Argentina equalized moments later, and the game was eventually forced to extra time. Mexico fought valiantly, and it took a moment of pure genius for Maxi Rodriguez to win the game 8 minutes into extra time with a sublime volley. The goal of the tournament shortlist was already looking stacked with weeks until the final. The following day, England qualified for the quarterfinals after beating Ecuador 1-0 thanks to a trademark free kick from David Beckham. Despite the win, the performance was that of a team under heavy scrutiny from its media, and celebrations were muted knowing that they'd face the winner of Portugal versus the Netherlands, a game that would later be called the Battle of Nuremberg. The last 16 tie, which turned into a bloodbath, was the first time in which Cristiano Ronaldo would play in a World Cup knockout match. The then 21-year-old impressed the world during the group stages with his flicks, tricks, and stepovers, and was clearly among the world's most exciting young players. Perhaps the Dutch didn't know how to deal with Ronaldo's quality fairly, so they went in on the young winger during the opening stages with needlessly aggressive challenges. Portugal were not going to let their prodigy get bullied by the Dutch, and Maniche entered the book after 20 minutes with a heavy challenge of his own. Supporters were shocked by the aggressive nature of the match between two nations that tend to play football the beautiful way, but Portugal offered a glimpse of how the game could have gone differently as Maniche glided past a couple of players before elegantly placing the ball in the net. A goal down, many assumed that the Dutch approach would change, but after 34 minutes, Ronaldo was forced off, having been on the receiving end of several disgraceful tackles during the opening stages. As halftime approached, 4 players had already been booked when Portugal's Costinha received his second yellow for a cynical handball. That was the first of 4 red cards during the game, as the Netherlands' Khalid Boularus and Giovanni van Bronckhorst, along with Portugal's Deco, were all red carded. Portugal hung on to win the game, which featured a record-breaking 20 cards, while the Dutch were disgraced. Italy and Australia met a day later, with nobody expecting the team featuring Totti, Andrea Pirlo, and Gennaro Gattuso to struggle to beat a footballing minnow. But as the game entered added time at the end of 90, the two teams could not be split. Then, an aimless ball was hoofed to Fabio Grosso, who dribbled into the box and deceived the referee with a blatant dive, giving Italy the chance to break Australia's hearts from the penalty spot with seconds remaining. Totti smashed the ball into the net, and Italy progressed into the last 8, but it was not convincing. Still, they'd play the winner of Switzerland and Ukraine in the following round, and the tournament seemed to be opening up nicely for them. Because neither Switzerland nor Ukraine was a world-class team, as proven by their 0-0 draw over 120 minutes, Ukraine won the match on penalties, despite Andriy Shevchenko missing his spot kick. After the board draw between the two European nations, everybody was ready for Brazil to turn on the style against Ghana the following evening. Fans only needed to wait 5 minutes for the entertainment to begin, as R9 produced a sensational step over to round the goalkeeper and become the tournament's all-time record scorer. Goals from Adriano and Zé Roberto rounded off a convincing win in which Brazil did not have to get out of first gear. Brazil would play the winner of Spain versus France in the following round. It was almost cruel for two teams of such undeniable quality to meet so early in the tournament. While France was mediocre during the group stages, their talent was undeniable. By contrast, the skill of Spain's youthful stars caught many punters off guard, and they were tipped to go all the way if they could get past the French. And Spain was beginning to dream as David Villa converted a 28th-minute penalty. Little did they know that moment finally woke France up. Just over 10 minutes later, Franck Ribéry replied by rounding the keeper to level the scoring 1-1. The teams could not be separated until late into the second half, when France received a free kick midway inside Spain's half. Zizou, who had suffered an uncharacteristically quiet tournament so far, stood over the ball. He expertly lofted the ball into the box, which eventually found Vieira, who headed the ball into the net. In stoppage time, Zidane made it 3 after breaking free, dodging the lunge of Carlos Puyol, composing himself, and smashing the ball into the net. The tournament's biggest star had truly woken up, and there seemed to be nothing that the rest of the football world would be able to do about a free-flowing Zidane during his final act. From that moment onward, the '06 World Cup would effectively become the Zidane Show. But before 36-year-old Zidane would shock the world by producing an all-timer performance against Brazil, Germany would face Argentina in the tournament's first quarterfinal. The hosts were growing in confidence and had the 72,000 Olympia Stadion behind them for their clash against the South Americans. However, Roberto Ayala shocked Berlin by converting Juan Roman Riquelme's corner. The Argentines looked set to win until Miroslav Klose equalized 9 minutes from time, sending the tie to extra time and eventually penalties. Germany scored each of their penalties, while Ayala and Esteban Cambiaso missed for Argentina, sending them out of the tournament. Lionel Messi returned to Argentina having scored 1 goal in 4 appearances, showing small flashes of brilliance. But to win a World Cup, you need more than flashes of brilliance, and Italy knew that if they were serious about lifting the trophy that summer, they'd need to start putting some meaningful performances together, starting with their quarterfinal clash with Ukraine. Eager to prove themselves to the world, Italy opened the scoring after 6 minutes with a long-range effort from Gianluca Zambrotta. Like France, Italy seemed to have finally woken up and rounding off their resounding victory with 2 second-half goals from Luca Toni. Even if their attacking football was not the brightest, Italy had reached the semi-finals while only conceding a single goal throughout the entire tournament. Gianluigi Buffon was imperious in goal and was protected by an excellent defensive line led by Fabio Cannavaro. Many began to nickname the defender the Berlin Wall, and if he could continue being so faultless throughout the remainder of the tournament, there was no limit on how far Italy could progress, even if they were to come up against R9, Zidane, or Klose. England and Portugal went head-to-head the following night in a quarterfinal tie that would be talked about for decades. The English were undoubtedly the better side during the opening hour before 2 Man United stars created an iconic World Cup moment. Wayne Rooney was determined to get his team into the lead, but got dragged into a messy confrontation with Ricardo Carvalho in the middle of the pitch. Rooney kicked out at the Portuguese star, but he would not have expected his Man United teammate Cristiano Ronaldo came rushing in, demanding a red card. In disbelief, Rooney pushed Ronaldo and received a red card a second later. As the broadcast zoomed in on Ronaldo in the aftermath of Rooney's red, he winked at the camera as if to say he had deliberately contributed to his teammates' dismissal. Without their star man, England were unable to find a winning goal and eventually lost on a penalty shootout in which CR7 scored the decisive penalty. Whether the youngster's approach was popular or not, he was already providing clutch moments. He'd go on to play against the winner of Brazil and France at his first World Cup semi. But even though Ronaldo was writing the headlines, he would not be the main story in the semifinals, as the French and Brazilian teams were stacked with players who'd already won the tournament. When the teams walked out for their quarterfinal tie, it looked as if it were a fantasy all-star game. Footballing gods like Roberto Carlos, Cafu, Kaká, Ronaldinho, and R9 stood in the tunnel meters away from Francis Vieira, Henry, and Ribéry. But it was the aging, bald-haired Zidane that would stand out against a field of players where many would go down among the greatest to ever play in their position. Inside the opening minute, Zidane stood on the ball, produced a drag back, and skipped past a couple of defenders with a step over. The Brazilian players looked at one another in shock that Zidane was still operating at such a level. The majestic midfielder played a combination of long and short passes, expertly controlled aerial balls, and even juggled with it as he controlled the tempo of the game. Brazil couldn't get close to Zidane, and by halftime, many were already lauding it as one of the greatest individual World Cup performances of all time. His historic performance was finally symbolized with an assist after 57 minutes as Henry got on the end of his pinpoint free kick. France held on to win. Zidane produced a perfect performance, and the legends of Brazil lay on the floor knowing that an era in which their team had won 2 of the last 3 World Cups had finally come to an end. Perhaps even more surprisingly, their dominance had not come undone by a new star, but by a 36-year-old who had already been there at their peak. At this moment, it almost felt like destiny that France would win the World Cup during Zidane's swan song. But before he'd be the difference maker against Portugal in the semis, Germany would face Italy. As the hosts, Germany went into the semi-final as favorites. They had proven that they could comprehensively beat the tournament's lesser teams during the group stages and last 16, and demonstrated resilience to come from behind to knock out Argentina in the last 8. Crucially, they had Podolski and Klose in attack, who had scored 8 goals between them at the tournament so far. They would need at least one of their forwards to be on form if they were to beat an Italian side that had not conceded since the second game of the group stages. There was a feeling that if one of the Germans could bring down the Berlin Wall, Cannavaro, then Italy may not have enough in attack to respond. But for 119 minutes, Italy frustrated Germany, limiting the hosts to half chances and long-range efforts. Italy negotiated the electric atmosphere of the Signal Iduna Park expertly and trusted the strength of their defenders as they sat back and let Germany attack. Seconds from time, the ball landed to Pirlo on the edge of the box. Composed as ever, the iconic midfielder took a few touches before playing an intricate pass to Fabio Grosso, who netted the game's opening goal. Germany desperately attempted to respond, which allowed Alessandro Del Piero to seal the win with a side-of-the-foot finish in stoppage time. The hosts crumbled in their own backyard, while Italy extended the time in which they had not conceded to over 550 minutes. If they continued that record into the final, the only way they could be beaten was by a penalty shootout. But given that they'd faced the winner of Portugal versus France, it was too early for Cannavaro and company to get ahead of themselves. The game was particularly significant for Portugal. While the nation has improved its international tournament finishes across the 21st century, the '06 tournament was only the fourth World Cup that they'd participated in. In 1966, Portugal reached the semifinals, but they had not even reached the knockout stages since then. But with a young Cristiano Ronaldo combining with Deco, Luis Figo, and Paoletta, anything felt possible, even against the greatness of Zidane. But even with all the stars in the French team, it took a careless mistake for the '98 winners to establish their lead. Ricardo Carvalho clumsily took Henry down inside the box, gifting a penalty that Zidane would take. Zizou placed the ball to the keeper's left, and France were 1-0 up, seemingly game over given the quality of their team. In response, Ronaldo took a 35-yard free kick that looked promising but ultimately fell into the keeper's hands. The future Ballon d'Or winner would produce iconic moments in the years to come, but in '06, he was forced to watch the established French stars celebrate booking their place in the tournament's final. France versus Italy, a game between one of Europe's greatest footballing nations of the 20th century, Italy, and one that would become iconic in the modern era. Italy had previously won the World Cup in 1934, 1938, and 1982, while France inspired a new generation with their triumph in 1998. It was a final of contrasting styles, attack versus defense, flair versus structure, new versus old. For that reason, combined with the Zidane swan song factor, many neutrals wanted the French to win their second World Cup. After all, Henry was also among the most likable players of the era, while Vieira had been dominant in the Premier League for several seasons. So the world stopped, with many expecting the artistry of France to finally unlock the Italian defense. And after just 7 minutes, it finally happened. Italy conceded for the first time since their draw with the US. Marco Materazzi took down Florent Malouda inside the box, giving the referee no choice but to award a penalty. Zidane stepped up and attempted the audacious, a Panenka in the World Cup final. Whether the genius attempted his penalty to hit the bar on his way in is unclear, but it needed a moment of creativity and genuine courage to finally get past Buffon. With Italy's crazy clean sheet record over, France looked set to go on and win its second World Cup. But the Italians knew that they were not going to get the better of France with beautiful, free-flowing football. So when they were awarded a corner after 19 minutes, all the big boys charged into the box. Pirlo's cross found Marco Materazzi, who emphatically headed the ball into the goal to level the scoring. And despite giving away a penalty and scoring a goal at the other end, his biggest contribution of the game was still to come. But first, Italy and France would battle it out for the remainder of the 90 minutes, with chances being conceded at both ends. Luca Toni almost replicated Materazzi's goal, again from a Pirlo corner, but it hit the bar. At the other end, Zidane played an intricate pass to Malouda, who was clearly brought down inside the box, but the referee dismissed the French appeals for a penalty. In the second half, Zidane came close to providing his career with a perfect ending, as his header looked destined to end up in the back of the net, but Buffon stopped the effort with a fine save. The final eventually went to extra time, when the most shocking moment in World Cup history occurred. In the 110th minute, France were awarded a free kick midway inside the half, when the referee paused the game for a separate incident that had taken place at the opposite end of the pitch. Camera replay showed Materazzi and Zidane in discussion as they jogged back from the Italy box. The dialogue appeared heated, but nobody could have expected Zidane to turn around and headbutt the Italian as if he was a charging bull. It was an indisputable red card-worthy act of violence, but it was unclear whether any of the officials had spotted the challenge. Eventually, the referee conversed with the linesman, who instructed him to send off the French captain. And so, Zidane was dismissed. A shameful act in his final game, with France still within a chance of lifting its second World Cup. But what had Materazzi said to him to make him respond so aggressively? In a later interview with Italian Football TV, Materazzi claimed, "My trash talking was nothing. He offered me his shirt. I said, no, I'd prefer your sister." It doesn't seem like a comment worthy of of jeopardizing your nation's chances in a World Cup final, something Zidane understands, having suggested in a later interview, "I'm not proud of it, but it's part of my career. At that time, I was more fragile." France were left to battle on without their talisman and survived the final 10 minutes of extra time despite pressure from the Italians. Given that Zidane had already scored 2 penalties at the World Cup, his absence was significant. But that wasn't the only reason that swung the penalty shootout in Italy's favor. His final act was so shocking that his fellow French players were still processing the actions of their captain, while the Italians received a little boost knowing that their opponent's star man had done something so appalling. Italy scored each of their penalties, while Trezeguet missed for France, ultimately allowing Fabio Grosso to score the World Cup winning penalty and spark celebrations worthy of a final that would not be forgotten. Cannavaro lifted the trophy as Pirlo, Buffon, and Del Piero celebrated beneath their inspirational center back. Despite conceding in the final, the Berlin Wall had not been torn down at the Olympiastadion as Italy won its 4th World Cup. That would not be the only trophy that Cannavaro would lift in 2006. In November, he became one of the few defenders in history to win the Ballon d'Or, with Buffon finishing in 2nd place and Henry getting 3rd spot. Zidane finished in 4th position and left wondering what could have been. Had he kept his cool instead of producing a brutal assault on Materazzi, it's possible that the great midfielder would have lifted the World Cup and the Ballon d'Or in his final year as a professional. But many argue that Zidane's final act does not deter his legacy, but actually adds to it. The midfielder was always a maverick. He played the beautiful game at his own pace, in his own style, and a style that nobody else could match. Perhaps there's no other world-class player in the history of the game that would have made such a reckless decision minutes before their potentially crowning moment, but nobody else is Zidane. Zizou was one of a kind and a colorful footballer who was capable of the sublime and the ridiculous within minutes of each other. The act encapsulated his wonderful 26-year career in which he lifted the World Cup, European Championships, Champions League, La Liga, and Serie A.